everyone, Helen Blunden here at Activate Learn on Twitter. As you can see, I'm joined by my cat Pud, who joins me whenever I do read here on the sofa. He's my foot warmer. But today I've got a review, and I finished this book quite quickly. Within a couple of days it was done and dusted. Why? Because it was such a good read. It was a coming of age novel, and it was semi-autobiographical. The name is Ham on Rye by Charles Bukowski. Now, I came across this book through another reviewer on YouTube called Clifford Sargent, who has a YouTube channel called Better Than Food. I've been trawling through his different reviews of different books and creating myself a wonderful reading list, and I'm glad I found his YouTube channel because it's just opened up my reading immensely. Through him, I'd learned of Charles Bukowski. Apparently he's really well known in America. I don't know who he is. I don't know who he was. But I'm glad I read Ham on Rye. It was when I looked into his story, I thought I'd start with this one, being that it's semi-autobiographical and it would get me into the mindset of understanding where he came from as a writer. Now, this novel reminded me so much of another novel which I loved, and you know 2 years ago I was obsessed by this novel. This is The Catcher in the Rye. A couple of years back I decided to read this book because I'd never learnt it as a textbook in school. Everyone was raving about it, so I thought I might as well read it, and I'm glad I did. I read it in the one sitting. I could not put it down. I was so obsessed by the character. Immediately after I finished the book, I started reading it again, so twice, I just did not want this book to finish. I cannot understand my obsession with this book. Soon after, I read it for a third time, and soon after that I carried it everywhere in my handbag with me and would open it up every so often and just read little bits of text just so I could get back into this character. Now, reading this reminded me of this. Why? Because the authors are very similar, and I think they were about the same period where they were writing. We're talking about authors who go through some massive anxiety, some stress, huge disappointments in their life, but massive stresses, psychological trauma. I think he was traumatized. So it's a semi-autobiographical novel or a depiction. It's about Henry Chinaski and his life growing up. Now, he's a kid. He lives in LA, but we're really reading about Charles Bukowski because much of the time as I was reading this, I'm thinking, nah, this is Charles. This is going through Charles, even though he just created this alias. So we learn about his family. His family had come out from Germany when he was 3 years old, and he settled in LA. Now, Charles Bukowski is a well-known writer, and the reviews in this, I'll just read out some of the reviews, says he's a laureate of the American lowlife. That's from Time magazine. Leonard Cohen said he brought everybody down to earth, even the angels. Sean Penn wrote, the thing about Bukowski is when you read what he has to say, he's right. Raunchy yet lyrical, occasionally hilarious while abysmally sad, said the San Francisco Chronicle. And that's what I've found out just reading this book. It's a book, it is about 350 pages, but the moment you opened it up, you are sucked into the story. It doesn't really matter where you open it up, you just go straight into it. Much of it is dialogue, so we're getting a picture of what Charles Bukowski was like. Now, his life was hard. It was depressing. It was filled with abuse. His father was a domineering, dominant, physically aggressive, violent man who beat his son for no reason from the ages from 6 onwards through to 11 or 12, 3 times a week with a strop in the bathroom, closed in the bathroom, and just beaten the crap out of him for absolutely no reason at all. We see just the strangeness of every Saturday morning him going out and mowing the lawns one way while his father watched him, and then having to mow the lawns the other way, and then having to the lawns be cut exactly straight. His father would come out, would lie on the ground, would watch the grass, and if there were any flyaways, again, he would get a beating. So with growing up like that, and with a mother who was fearful of her husband and just pandered to his needs, and always was really just extremely submissive to her husband and to her son, he did not get any love whatsoever, no support, no guidance, and this was how he had grown up. The other thing was, the themes coming out of this book for me was the extreme poverty, the fact that poverty and pretense, I would call it. And I say this because this is the kind of stuff I grew up with. The fact that you never show, or you never tell to others your financial situation. So his parents would be out of work, but for the sake of pretense, for the sake of keeping up appearances, his father would jump into a car every morning and pretend to go to work, just so the neighbours could see that they were possibly in a job. So stuff like that. As I was reading it, these are the kind of like the stories I grew up with, and the stories I heard, and even times I had been through myself. So when you have a situation like this, where a kid all his life knows just depression, the situation of poverty all around him, he does not want to be around people. He hates the whole idea of having to deal with humans. He doesn't like having people around. He likes his own company. He tries to get into sport and try and find an outlet, with kind of limited success. So we see him getting into football, getting into baseball, getting into boxing. But as you're reading it, you're thinking, shit, he's going to spiral out of control. This kid is depressed. He's depressed. He sees no light, no joy anywhere, except when he writes his stories, which the teachers love, and he's got this knack for writing, but he doesn't see any way out of it. He goes to a job. I mean, again, another theme of the book is about, I guess, society's expectations for us for work. His father, all he talks about is his work, like having a job, an 8-hour job every single day, where you're expected to just go in and do what is expected, stay there for 40 odd years, and if you don't stay there, you either quit or you die on the job or you retire. He just did not see a future in that at all. He was not the 8-hour man. And so everything around him really depressed him. The only thing that he enjoyed was getting a taste for alcohol, where he was introduced to his friend's father's wine cellar. And that was the first moment as a teenager he got the taste of alcohol, and something clicked in his head that he said, this is what I need. This was his only escape. And as we read the book, it just gets worse and worse and worse. Towards the end, where he gets booted out of home, he becomes he's an alcoholic wreck, trying to make sense of the world, but we see him spiraling out of control. So really, really fascinating book, and just the way he wrote, you get sucked into it straight away. Now, the other thing I noticed was, see these earmarks, dog mark pieces? As I was going through this book, there were just passages that I thought to myself, man, okay, this resonates. And obviously it resonated with a previous reader of this book, because they had earmarked the same places I did. So I'll give you an example of kind of like the writing. He says, my father had a master plan. He told me, my son, each man during his lifetime should buy a house. Finally, he dies and leaves that house to his son. Then his son gets his own house and dies and leaves both houses to his son. That's 2 houses. That son gets his house. That's 3 houses. The family structure, victory over adversity through the family. He believed in it. Take the family, mix with God and country, add the 10-hour workday, and you had what was needed. I looked at my father, at his hands, his face, his eyebrows, and I knew that this man had nothing to do with me. He was a stranger. My mother was non-existent. I was cursed. Looking at my father, I saw nothing but indecent dullness. Worse, he was even more afraid to fail than most others. Centuries of peasant blood and peasant training. The Chinaski bloodline had been thinned by a series of peasant servants who had surrendered their real lives for fractional and illusionary gains. Not a man in a line who said, I don't want a house, I want 1,000 houses now. He had sent me to that rich high school hoping that the ruler's attitude would rub off on me as I watched the rich boys screech up their cream-coloured coupes and pick up the girls in bright dresses. Instead, I learned that the poor usually stay poor, that the young rich smell the stink of the poor and learn to find it amusing. They had to laugh, otherwise it would be too terrifying. They'd learned that through the centuries. I would never forgive the girls for getting into those cream-coloured coupes with the laughing boys. They couldn't help it, of course, yet you always think, maybe. But no, there weren't any maybes. Wealth meant victory, and victory was the only reality. What woman chooses to live with a dishwasher? And he just goes on and on, like strong themes: domestic violence, alcoholism, depression, a man spiraling out of control, a childhood with absolutely no love, an understanding that you can see the genius is coming out, that this is where he started from, and that this is the beginnings of his exceptional writing. This is what he's come from, and I can only look forward to the books that come from this point onwards. So I'm really interested to explore his other books, even his poetry as well. I did have a look on YouTube and checked out some YouTube videos about the life of Charles Bukowski. There's kind of like a 3-part series of his life, which was very interesting. A life on cigarettes, booze, women, depression, just this black hole of him just trying to find something to hold on. Yeah, an amazing read. Read it. If you've read this, let me know what you think. Okay, bye for now. Say bye, Pud. We're going to go and find his other books online and go buy them, aren't we? Charles Bukowski liked cats. There was also another element in the book of the cruelty that humans, especially young boys, place on animals. So there was a couple of scenes where it really, really got to me. It also explained the reason why my father used to say to stay away from young boys. He gives us a glimpse of what boys get up to together in packs, and young men. Anyway, time to play with the cat, eh? Bye for now.